Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to lead a debate on the 2010 Climate Change Conference in Cancun. I'd like to start by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for their, I believe, excellent judgment in allocating time for this debate, and also the Green Alliance and Christian Aid for answering my questions as I researched for it. I'd like to thank the many constituents who've impressed upon me their concerns and priorities for the Cancun conference, especially the climate activists I met as part of the big climate connection. These representations made by my constituents are a great encouragement to me, in knowing that I do not have to choose between being an advocate for some of the most climate vulnerable people in the poorest countries of the world and representing them, my constituents, because this is exactly what they want me to do in this place. I said at the time of my application to the committee, Mr. Chope, that a third of members in this House are new this year and are yet to have an opportunity to debate climate change policy. I know that among those are members that are keen to take part in this debate. I'm looking forward in particular to the contribution for the spokesperson from the opposition who, like me, joined the House of Commons this year. Before I address the Minister, I'd like to start by acknowledging the leadership of the last government, the former Prime Minister, and indeed the role played by the current Leader of the Opposition, the achievement of a world first in the Climate Change Act, and the contribution made by many members of Parliament from all sides of the House, many of them no longer in the House of Commons, to strengthening that legislation. It's a record of leadership of which I think they can all be proud, and one on which this new government must build, not just in terms of ambition and commitment, but crucially, in terms of delivery. Our Foreign Secretary has described climate change as perhaps the 21st century's biggest foreign policy challenge. The upcoming Cancun conference, I believe, is critical to international response to that challenge. Not just because action is increasingly urgent, but because many are questioning, in the wake of disappointment in Copenhagen, the capability of international frameworks through the United Nations to address it. Prior to the Copenhagen conference, public expectations had reached fever pitch, despite the opaque nature of those negotiations and the difficulty that many people had in seeing the obstacles that they would meet, and for that matter, exactly who was placing those obstacles in the way. As the Foreign Secretary acknowledged in his recent speech in New York, the reason Copenhagen did not deliver on these high expectations was, and I quote, a lack of political will. Sadly, it seems that the easiest lesson to learn from Copenhagen has been to manage expectations for Cancun. I believe that at Cancun, the world needs to make progress both in terms of undertakings for mitigation and funding commitments for adaptation. My approach to undertakings for mitigation is that it is best to bring everyone on board that you can, to make as much progress with them as you can, even if there are some parties unwilling to come to the table. I hope that continuing progress in engaging the Chinese government, as exemplified by our own ministers in recent weeks, will allow substantial progress in this regard, even if some in the US Congress continue to set their face against their global responsibilities. I'm sure that others here today will want to speak about mitigation and suggest ways forward. However, in the time available to me, I would like to focus on climate finance. The report earlier this month by the United Nations Secretary-General's High-Level Advisory Group on Climate Change Financing, the AGF, sets out a number of innovative ways to deliver the substantial Copenhagen target of $100 billion climate finance a year by 2020. In fact, I think at this point it's right to congratulate my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, for his role on the advisory group and his contribution to that report. The advisory group report called the $100 billion commitment challenging but feasible. And I believe we must take on that challenge in Cancun, however gloomy the sky that heralds the conference. After all, feasible means achievable, and we must not live down to expectations. This finance must be truly additional to aid. Annual global aid transfers amount to around $120 billion, So simply redirecting the bulk of that money would have disastrous effects on humanitarian provision right across the globe. I do not believe that we can fund climate adaptation by diverting and repackaging aid, by cutting vital funds for urgent programs like the fight against malaria. Similarly, initiatives to harness private sector expertise and finance in tackling climate change are very welcome and critical to the solution. These should be welcomed, but they should not be credited to developed countries' own accounts, because the task and the responsibility that they have is greater than that. What's more, many small-scale climate adaptation projects often show no financial return, so remain stubbornly unattractive to private investment. I hope the Minister might be able to tell us whether he agrees that whilst leveraging private finance is indeed important, going forward, public finance remains irreplaceable in meeting the climate needs of the poorest people. Now, I've already offered eye-watering sums, and as the accountant in me, strayed into the sometimes dry discussions of financial commitments. So let me help colleagues by illustrating just what this climate finance is for, and indeed the difference it can make. More than half of all rural households in India still lack electricity. Fast Start Finance funds off-grid, locally managed, renewable energy schemes which deliver electricity to rural villages. Kasai village in Madhya Pradesh is unconnected to the national grid. Since 2005, a small 10-kilowatt biomass plant has generated Kasai electricity. The plant provides lighting for houses, streets, and the school, power for entertainment, and the electricity to run a flour mill, a milk chilling unit, and a water pumping system. Kasai has biomass in abundance: wood, crop residues, oil seeds, and cattle dung. This is gathered by villagers. There is a maintenance fee and a user charge, and the scheme is overseen by a village committee of 6 men and 5 women. The benefits of this scheme are manifold. Every house has piped water, far fewer residents migrate, agricultural production has trebled with the availability of water for irrigation. Villagers can now sell milk which previously went bad in the heat. The new mill allows people to process wheat and rice and sell the flour. The urgent need for reliable energy supply is met, while the use of renewable energy means growth in carbon emissions is limited. These double wins are just an example of Fast Start Finance, where a village thrives where once it faced dying. At Copenhagen, developed countries pledged $30 billion in short-term finance for projects just like this in the period 2010 to 2012. Of this $30 billion, $10 billion was pledged by the EU, which has so far delivered around $7.8 billion of that through existing channels such as the World Bank and the EU's own Global Climate Change Alliance. I'd like the Minister to tell us when the government will have set out not just the timing but the delivery mechanisms for allocating all of the remaining Fast Start finance that which the government has pledged. Can the Minister tell us whether the $1.5 billion pledged towards Fast Start finance in the Comprehensive Spending Review is additional to the government's overseas development assistance commitments? If it is not, can the Minister at least assure us that this is not a reflection of the government's attitude to long-term climate finance? Developed countries can now respond to the progress and menu of recommendations the advisory group has made. They have clear, practical choices about how to meet their obligations. For the UK government, I believe this is a key opportunity to show leadership at Cancun, plotting the roadmap for mobilising finance and turning these innovative sources into a reality. The advisory group identifies a menu of options: the auctioning of emissions allowances, carbon taxes, levies on international aviation and maritime transport, multilateral development banks, and even a financial transactions tax. These are realistic options which can generate serious revenue. Can I invite the Minister to give some indication as to which of the innovative sources of finance identified by the UN Advisory Group are priorities for his department ahead of Cancun? Will the Minister support a levy on international aviation and shipping? will the British government show leadership through the EU in coordinating a critical mass of developed countries to make possible a financial transactions tax? Mr. Chope, in developing countries, they suffer more than 90% of the effects of climate change, despite having done the least to contribute to its causes. 250 million people are directly affected by desertification. 1 billion of them are at risk. 135 million people are at risk of displacement due to the effects of environmental deterioration. Many of these people are the world's poorest and most vulnerable citizens. Countries like Malawi, Bangladesh and Sudan are the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, despite having done the least to contribute to rising carbon emissions. Colleagues, this is our doing, but it's the most vulnerable people in the world who are facing the consequences. I believe we have a responsibility to them. This much was acknowledged at Copenhagen. Action on climate finance now is not some kind of vague add-on, something it would be nice to achieve, nor is it even an apology for failing to reach binding agreements on mitigation. It is an essential component in reaching an internationally just settlement as part of the response to this global challenge. Our Secretary of State has clearly made good progress with his colleagues on the advisory group in pointing to how climate finance can be delivered. Now the world needs to move forward. We need concrete proposals, and we need his government to show leadership at these negotiations. Mr. Chope, we must seek to build international consensus, to cooperate, and to get these negotiations back on track. It's too late to stop now.